Hey, we're your hosts.
I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Jonathan.
And we believe that one of the most valuable gifts you can give to yourself is the gift of wholeness through integrating all aspects of what it means to be human.
And in this podcast, we're bringing you insight, information, and inspiration to move from a stressful to stress-free life.
Your journey to becoming even healthier and happier starts right now.
Welcome to Wellness Theory, the podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's show. We are joined by Charlotte Spurway, who is one of the best relationship psychologists in the UAE. She uses a unique combination of psychotherapy and coaching to support men and women as they struggle with relationship dynamics with themselves and others. She really understands the challenges and the emotions that can arise during divorce, breakups, relationships, and long-term singlehood. So what better person to introduce you today than Charlotte Spurway? Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Our listeners are going to love this episode because relationship stress is a biggie, right? Like you said, whether it's with relationships with ourselves or with others. But before we dive in and really get into it, I would love for you to share, why have you dedicated your life to relationships?
Oh, good question. I think it all began on my own personal journey several years ago. And I was going through my own marriage stresses, shall we say, and decided that divorce was the right thing for me. And I had to navigate that difficult time, if you like, as we've all been there. We've all been through a breakup, or we've been through maybe a divorce ourselves. And I just found so much benefit in my own personal therapy that I decided to retrain. And also moving away from the UK, I kind of had more life challenges, shall we say, as an expat in the region. So I just wanted to give back to others. So yeah, I retrained, learned psychology, and here we are today, being a relationship therapist.
I love it. I love it so much. I actually really do find that the best people that are working in these fields are the ones that have actually had their own touch points with the challenges, because there seems to be that much deeper level of understanding and empathy.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. And that's why I kind of amalgamate, like you said, kind of traditional therapy with more of a modern contemporary coaching, because I just remember wasting, honestly, years in therapy. And I just was like, I'm just not moving. I was doing my other reading. I was getting my hands on every single self-help book I could, really actively trying. But there just wasn't this big aha moment for a long time. And it wasn't until I changed and spoke to a lady who kind of was a coach and had the psychology background, and that amalgamation of the two plus my journey, I feel, can really speed things along for people. And I've had very positive results of clients who are like, oh my gosh, in a couple of hours I'm already starting to feel huge benefits, which is excellent. That's what we're here for. Not spending time in the pity or the hard emotions or the challenges.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a tricky point to get to, I think, isn't it? Is moving from those harder emotions into a place where we can actually move forward. So to kick off really the conversation around relationships and stress, tell me, what's the link between the two?
Well, the link is quite high, and everybody's heard about stress in terms of it increasing our adrenaline or increasing our cortisol, and we've heard of terms like anxiety, depression, right? So we've all kind of felt that pressure in our chests or that feeling in our stomach where we kind of just feel emotionally overwhelmed. And what people don't talk about is the importance of our personal relationships on that. And not many people in the field are talking about attachment or integrated attachment systems within ourselves, which is what most of my work, because attachment systems, whether we're activated or deactivated, link a lot to our subconscious programming. It links a lot to our core wounds. And the one we have heard about is obviously the SNS, the sympathetic nervous system, which everyone's heard of: fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn. And they've heard about how that is being triggered from stressful responses. So it's combining that and learning more about attachment theory which can then push people away, or we become really clingy and needy, and a range of emotions that come up from that.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I really enjoyed our conversation when we was, checking in whether you're a good fit for this podcast, because you speak about attachment theory, and it's something that I absolutely love. This topic is something that we dive into with our coaching clients as well. It was a game changer for me personally. I got to understand myself on a whole new level when I started to understand different attachment styles and how that was playing out, and it just started to really make clear some of the challenges that I'd been facing, because for all this time I thought there was something wrong with me and that there wasn't an explanation for it. It's just who I am. So therefore then relationships, whether they were work relationships or romantic relationships or friendships, there was always this disconnect, and I never really, I don't think, was able to experience a deep level of connection. And when I then got really into the depths of my own journey, I'd modeled certain relationships growing up, turbulent parent breakup, very interesting attachment styles that I created to my own parents that I was then seeing playing out in my work situations and then in my romantic relationships. So it's like it's an absolute brilliant Pandora's box to go into. So Charlie, please tell us, for our listeners that have never heard of attachment theory, what is it and why do we need to know about it?
Yeah, for sure. So attachment theory is the one thing I get all of my clients to do at the very beginning, is try and find out what attachment you are. But again, in the field of psychology, people seem to put different attachments as good or bad. So just want to make it clear to the viewers, attachment styles are not good or bad. They are just what we have. And it's kind of like on a continuum line. So the best place to be would be secure attachment, which is where we kind of all want to be for more healthy relationships. And when I'm using the word relationship, I don't necessarily mean romantic. So I do mean friends, I do mean co-workers. And we can go towards an insecure method. So it could be that we go towards more anxious, or we become more avoidant. So when we are being more avoidant, we're kind of in a deactivation mode. So if anyone's experienced firsthand, they do it, or maybe they recognize it in someone in their lives, maybe all of a sudden they just kind of run away. They just kind of shut down. They can't communicate anymore, or they just pick up and go. Or possibly you can see someone doing task after task after task. They're kind of never stopping. So they're in constant flight mode.
Yeah.
And this is a deactivating coping strategy for self-protection. Whereas if we go towards more anxious attachment style, this is when we're in hyperactivation. So this is where we really need people. So we've all had the person who just messages us way too much, or that friend who's constantly, texting us, or maybe we've been dating someone that's got clingy behavior, and someone's always seeking for love and connection. So possibly the two extremes of hyperactivation or deactivation can create really big kind of unhealthy coping strategies for our needs to be met. Yeah. And attachment theory is developed from childhood, normally from birth to about 8 years old. That's when it becomes most dominant. However, the good news is it doesn't stay stationary. We can move it up and down, and events that happen within our life post 8 also have a huge impact. So, if we lost a loved one, for example, or if we went through a very bad breakup, or, we were part of an affair, or, maybe we're in our 40s and we've just had about 15 or 20 breakups. And that starts to create kind of attachment scarring, which can push people into activation or deactivation kind of more quickly, and it can cement down. So that's attachment in a basic form, but I'm happy to go into it in more detail if you want me to.
Yeah, no, that's a really good place to start, because anybody listening to this, they might not necessarily realize that actually those early events in life have got anything to do with what's happening now in their day to day. And these relationships is really important to point out as well, is that you're talking about is the relationship with self also. So for me, when I was working through this, I actually kind of all over that continuum but I kind of jumped over the secure part in the middle. So it's very much an avoidant, anxious attachment style that I'd created, and I still have to keep an eye on it now today, based on past traumas, past experiences. And it's something that has really played a role in my life, but with a relationship to myself. So you said like the running away thing and like avoiding stuff. There's times where I know that I've been avoiding myself. It's not about avoiding my partner or avoiding a situation necessarily. It's about me avoiding sitting with me and sitting with some of my harder feelings. So anyone listening to this, like, this is true for every human being. Not necessarily that you're anxious and avoidant or that you're one or the other, but it's true for every human being that we all have an attachment style, right?
Yeah, there's actually four. So there's obviously secure, there's anxious, preoccupied that we've spoken about. Avoidant is not just known as that, it's known as dismissive avoidant. But then the complicated one is the fearful avoidant, and that's where, like you've described, you have both anxious and avoidant. So in 1 minute, you can massively need somebody. In maybe 5 minutes later, you go the other way in the system, and then you're like, no, actually, like, I'm going to push you away. And then it goes back to like really clingy behavior. So the chaos within our attachment system is not only fluctuating between that, but also it then triggers the fight, flight, and fawn response as well. So when we're in these systems and we're feeling unregulated, and we kind of don't know how to cope and have healthy coping mechanisms around our behavior, because let's face it, most of the time we're just running on autopilot. Yep. We've all heard, the conscious mind can't overpower the subconscious mind. We've all heard, that subconscious is 95% of what we do. And this is where the attachment and the SNS is ruled by. So when we're just saying things, or we're just acting in a way, or we're having these behaviors, I could probably guarantee that most of them are just an unhealthy coping mechanism to get one of your underlying needs met, but you're just doing it in an unhealthy way. There's nothing wrong with the need or what that person's seeking, but it's reprogramming and learning new habits around how to have healthy coping mechanisms to deal with how we're firing and wiring.
Nice. So can you give some more examples of signs of each of the different attachment styles? So anyone listening could, I mean, obviously there's only so much you can go into, obviously, in a podcast episode. I'm sure you can do a whole interview for every single style. But can you give any kind of like top signs that somebody might be able to recognize within themselves for them to maybe be able to just start to recognize where they are?
Yeah, for sure. If we are anxious, preoccupied, we probably have core wounds which are kind of surrounded around I feel alone. Maybe those deeper, harder feelings of I feel abandoned. Maybe there's internal dialogue. Maybe I'm disliked. Maybe I don't matter. Possibly, therefore, we are reaching out all of the time and seeking above normal levels of proximity. Maybe we always need to be around people. Maybe we always need to be in social contact, whether that's on the phone, on a call, out for dinner, out for drinks. We probably crave social and emotional connection a lot. We might test people in our lives to see if they truly love us, or to see if they're truly there for us. And they normally set them up to fail. And then they prove their subconscious narrative that I'm not loved, that I am alone, and that I'm disliked and I don't matter. Yeah. So that's kind of behaviors of the anxious, preoccupied. If, just for the example's sake, if we go with the dismissive avoidant, they probably have more emotions around feeling I'm trapped, feeling misunderstood. The big one is there's something wrong with me. So kind of like I'm defective, like what's wrong with me, and it carries quite a high wound around shame. And avoidant individuals struggle with shame, struggle with embarrassment, feeling misunderstood, and therefore they shut down and keep people at arm's length to avoid emotional intimacy. Because dismissive avoidance have learned that love hurts. They've learned that I kind of get let down. So I self-protect by keeping people away, removing the possibility of creating connection in order to keep myself safe. Because that way it's familiar, I stay in my comfort zone, and I kind of don't need to put myself out there on an olive branch, or be the carrot dangling, and then I can't get hurt. So those are kind of the two extremes of kind of the emotions that might come up. The negative internal dialogue. I call mine the gremlin. We've all got that chimp or that gremlin in our mind that kind of likes to take over and have that negative, quite hard dialogue.
My one's called Margaret. I apologize for any of our listeners that are called Margaret for whatever reason. That's what made sense at the time of naming.
But it's amazing because once you can name it and you go, yeah, this isn't actually me. This is just like my baggage. This is just kind of my old wiring. It's no longer serving me. As soon as you can name it and you've got that awareness, you can start to, heal and learn more about yourself and create a healthy relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, hi Margaret.
Really, really great examples there. So anyone listening, if any of those resonate with you, this is the time to really start to listen in close to the rest of this conversation, because we're going to kind of dive into what you can perhaps start to look at to move into perhaps more of a healthier dynamic with yourself and the people in your life. But before we do, one of the things that really concerns me about these attachment styles, and again, speaking from personal experience rather than professional with clients, is the state of my nervous system given my attachment styles. Realizing that I was in these constant hyper arousal or shutdown states, understanding that, and then being able to be like, wow, okay, so my body is literally working double time. It's constantly more or less feeling like it's under threat to some extent. And then I wondered why I burnt out, right? But obviously not knowing that was happening. But these attachment styles have a direct correlation to how we're actually, regulating ourselves and how healthy we are as a result. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. If we cannot regulate our attachment system, our activation or deactivation, we, like you said, are going to peak, and then we're going to go into those troughs. And that changes in oxytocin, serotonin, cortisol, adrenaline, is exhausting. Our bodies, when we think back to fight, flight, fawn, freeze response, it was only ever created within the human body for, a few minutes, right? To get over a predator, for, a life or death situation. And there are, many people out there who still need to use that, in different situations. But how it's developed within our more contemporary psyche is through the workplace, of constant exhaustion, being busy, doing lots of things, and then this kind of emotional dysregulation that we've all learned to just kind of shut up, get on with it. The whole stories of just, man up, or, put your big girl pants on, these horrible phrases that, I detest, but we've all been taught and conditioned that from childhood, and that we can't be vulnerable, or, vulnerability is kind of seen as a negative, whereas I always try and advocate that no, vulnerability is actually bravery, and it's courageous. And would we rather want connection with somebody? Vulnerability creates connection, which therefore puts us more in a homeostasis, whereas anger or arguments all that does is, yeah, we're trying to get love and connection when we might provoke somebody and we have anger and we kind of like want to prod our partner, for example. Yeah, it creates that huge increase in adrenaline or cortisol or oxytocin, but actually at such an extreme peak, it is tiring, and our body is not meant to be in these extreme kind of survival states or traumatic responses for long periods of time. We're not supposed to feel it on an hourly, daily basis. You know, it was originally for, I don't know, once or twice a week when we went out on a hunt, right? And then we would rest. So no wonder why so many of us are feeling emotionally exhausted. We're feeling burnt out. We kind of then go, you know what, I'm just going to give up. Like, I'm just going to stay in, or, you know, I'm just going to not kind of socialize with life, or people just keep going because they don't know how to stop. And that's the other activation. So yes, in answer to your question, when our systems are out of homeostasis, it is exhausting. So people are not alone there. It happens to everybody.
I think it's really important to reiterate what you said earlier, that none of these attachment styles are right or wrong. They just are what they are. We've just evolved in the way that we have based on our own unique experiences. But what is important is how we actually turn these attachment styles into something healthy. So I'd love for you to shed some light onto that. So for our listeners that have just heard the signs and are starting to understand perhaps where they are, and they're recognizing perhaps some patterns in their own lives, how does somebody begin to build a more secure attachment style within themselves to be able to then move into healthier relationships externally?
Yeah, so the first step is recognizing your attachment system. And if you've got no idea what yours is, you can take the free quiz on my website. So it's on charlottespurway.com. It takes less than 5 minutes. Just answer the questions and you get an answer back. So that's the first step. Just kind of check whereabouts you are in the 4 categories. Then once you know, read up about it. Okay, dive into literature. You know, a really good book is called Attached by Dr. Amer Levine, and he goes into anxious and avoidant behaviors. So you can start to read through and start to kind of recognize more patterns. And I always think that when we've got awareness, it's an amazing first step, because then your filtering system will start to go, oh yeah, I see that in that person now, or okay, so this is happening. And we'll start to be aware of our surroundings, which starts to take us away from that subconscious conditioning and start to make it more conscious. Then after that, it's the deep dive. It's, going into that, reprogramming that. And that's probably where you probably need to speak to somebody like myself. It's very difficult to do that on your own. But start to recondition and reprogram your core wounds, your beliefs, because I guarantee you that most of the beliefs you hold are probably not your own. Yeah. So your beliefs are not necessarily your own because they've been conditioned from society, or conditioned from our parents, or conditioned by our friends or our workplace. So it's start to ask questions. Am I actually truly authentic me? Or has this come from other places? And then the next thing I always advise is, do you know what you need? And this sounds like such a basic question, but so many of my clients don't know their needs. For example, like, do you have a need for personal growth, or is your emotional connection more of a need? Do you have a social connection need? Do you have a health and fitness one? Do you have significance? Do you seek purpose? Do you seek approval? And then we can talk about love languages as well. But if people don't know what they need and what fires them, they can't go with it.
Yep.
They can't incorporate it into their life, and they definitely can't ask for the help from their family, their friends, their romantic partner to help. You know, a really good example is I always thought I was being an amazing, daughter, sister, partner, friend, because I would always buy self-help books around, you know, like development of your psyche. And for me, like that was the best present. But if somebody's needs isn't personal growth, isn't, you know, development of relationships and emotional connection, maybe there's health and fitness. They're like, this is a really bad present. Like, I've got no need for this. So if we can start to understand my needs, and then, you know, your partner's needs, for example, or some other significant in your life, you can start to realize, well, if our needs are not correlating, or our love languages are not correlating, then actually there's that disconnect, and it creates more stress in relationships.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a big checklist of what to start doing, but it can be done. It has been done by others. So there is hope if you're feeling lost at the moment, and dive into it, because I think it's fascinating.
What you said about like self-awareness, like it's, I mean, all of what you said is brilliant, but the self-awareness piece I think is so important. Now, everybody that's listening will know my podcast host, business partner, husband, partner in life, all the rest of it, Jonathan. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here for this episode, so we might have to bring you back on just for the both of us, just to see how that dynamic is and to have maybe a different topic in mind. But to use our relationship as an example of some of these attachment styles playing out might be helpful. So when we first got together, I was an absolute runner. So I, like you said, I was like going from those extremes. It's like 1 minute I'm there, I'm present, we're hanging out, everything's good. The next minute I've disappeared for like a couple of weeks. I'm like, I'm busy, I'm going out with friends, I'm doing this. And he's just like left wondering like what's going on, poor John. But at the same time, he was also experiencing his own attachment styles and attaching his own meanings to what that meant about him, even though it was actually nothing to do with him, why I was behaving the way I was. It was just that was some of the behavior that I modeled, and it was a way of protecting myself based on past
Exactly. And then you're out of alignment, and you both feel more stressed, you both feel not loved in the way you need to be loved.
Exactly.
And then it puts relationship stress on you.
Exactly. And I was experiencing a big internal conflict around being vulnerable, and I think it comes back to what you said about feeling secure and feeling safe, and this need to protect. Because for me it was like, well, if I'm vulnerable, then I'm not safe. And this was this belief that I had, not consciously at the time, because obviously that was how it was playing out, but self-awareness allowed me to get to the point of knowing that there was this internal conflict going on, and that was standing in the way of me being able to deepen my connection with Jonathan. And it was only when I worked through that we were able to really come together and become the great team that we are today. Don't get me wrong, we're not perfect, but we're very self-aware. We know what our attachment styles are, what our wounding is. We know what kind of rears its ugly head when it doesn't need to. We can learn from it, and I can see when certain things in him are playing out and him with me. And if I hadn't done that inner work for myself, there's no way I would have been able to be the partner that I am today. And I know the same is true for him. So I think it always starts with the man in the mirror, as good old MJ would say, or the woman in the mirror. But it's so important for us to look at ourselves first before we start to even think about how we are in relationships with others. Like you said, you felt you like this is amazing, like sister and daughter and everything, but actually like that you were still thinking about you in essence in those moments, right? You wasn't taking it.
I was loving in the way that I like to be loved.
Exactly.
And that's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
But if the person on the other end doesn't receive love in that way, we need to be more emotionally aware
Yep.
of the other people in our lives, so we can make them feel lit up and, you know, light up in the way that they want to be loved. So, you know, all relationships, we are 50% of every one of them, of everyone in our lives.
Yeah.
So if we can have a really good understanding of ourselves, it then allows us to start trying to be able to understand and love those significant people in our life better, to create those deeper connections. Yeah. But I just wanted to go on to your task after task kind of thing and go, when we know, are we doing it for comfort? Are we doing it for security? Are we doing it because we're trying to run away from something and stay busy and protect ourselves? the same as the person who doesn't want to do anything and stays in the house and kind of is shutting off from the world. Like, why is that? Again, are you trying to seek safety? From what? Are you trying to seek comfort? You know, is it that actually you don't want to put yourself out there because you're scared of failing? You know, you have a massive fear of failure. Is it because you struggle socially because you feel people aren't going to like you, right? Or you're not good enough, so there's no point in putting yourself out there. So starting to question what we do is the first step to healing, because then we can try and kind of change our narrative in that internal, yours is Margaret, mine's the gremlin, and try and change that for a more positive, healthier coping strategy to get the needs met that we don't know is underlying.
It's funny, when I was going through kind of learning and understand attachment styles, there's this whole kind of world of then inner child archetypes, right? Where we basically, when our needs are not met, we create these personas, we create these like masks for ourselves, and that then is kind of how we try to meet our needs. And for me, a big one was the overachiever, right? Needing to feel seen and heard and validated in so many ways. But at the same time, I was also somebody that was trying to take care of everybody else and like almost like protect other people. I think really in hindsight too, because I was trying to protect myself from whatever the thing was I was trying to protect myself from. And it's just incredible how intelligent our subconscious is, that it creates all of this to essentially hide what's really going on under the surface. So yeah, I would love for you to just share any insights you have on that.
Yeah, so our subconscious mind is quite ridiculous, really. It actually holds on to pain, because if it holds on to pain, we can therefore guard up, armor up, or we can predict what will happen. So therefore, we stay with familiar suffering. So therefore, our attachment system stays in either activation or deactivation, depending on which way we go, to kind of crazily and stupidly kind of protect ourselves, but it's actually not protecting ourselves. It's actually creating more kind of pain and suffering. And there's a rank that we can use in psychology, and pain might be when we rank something like 1 to 4, for example. Whereas when we go into 5 to 10, that's where we start to suffer. And the 5 to 10 and the real deep suffering of emotions actually isn't from the situation itself. It's from the story that our subconscious is telling us that it means, which is normally always untrue. And, you know, I'm glad I'm wearing my glasses today, but we see life in our subconscious filter. Every single person in the world is wearing their own glasses, okay? And they're tinted with our experiences, our past emotions, and we see things. For example, if I'm, you know, a woman who's had really bad experiences with men, right? Versus another woman who's had really amazing experiences with men. If we walk into a conference room, both at the same time, through the same doors, and the room is predominantly filled with men, the first person is going to go, oh, Jesus, like, what's the point in me being here? Like, I'm disliked. They're going to be bad, you know, and that's the subconscious internal dialogue. I will probably therefore have more negative interactions during that conference than the other person who's gone, oh, amazing, like I can speak freely, I've got really good memories from talking to guys, you know, it's really positive. It's the same for a man, 2 men walking to a room and there's a bunch of women, right? If we've had bad relationships with our mum or our sister or previous girlfriends, we're going to go, oh gosh, this is going to be a really hard conference. So that subconscious narrative, that's probably untrue, because we might not have ever met these people in this conference room, but our tinted glasses are already telling us to expect pain, to expect suffering, because we've done it in the past. Whereas the other person's like, no, this is going to be great. My subconscious is telling me, no, we've got positive memories, we've got positive feelings, this is safe. So it's our subconscious mind, and how our attachment works with our core wounding is very powerful, and we don't even realize we have a grasp on it.
Yeah, it is so interesting that the way forward, I believe, is that we have to upgrade our subconscious so that we can live for who we are today, not for who we were when we created those ideas. It's so common to speak to clients and to hear somebody that's got this model of the world. They see the world a certain way, and when we actually really get into things, it's like they decided that when they were like 7 years old over something that was probably quite trivial in relation to what they're experiencing today, and they suddenly realize, oh, actually, do you know what, that doesn't serve me now, because now I'm an adult, now I'm in this situation, and that might have served me then, but it doesn't serve me now. And that's an extremely powerful place to be, because that's when your world starts to change, right?
Well, that's a fantastic point, because most of our subconscious has been created before we were 8 years old. That's where we kind of learn everything for the first time. And if our subconscious has one positive experience, it tends to hold that and wire that deep into the subconscious, and it sticks. So
Yes.
you're absolutely right. Having a tantrum when we were a child, maybe got our needs met one time and our parents came and hugged us and gave us what we wanted. We all know someone who's got angry in a boardroom, for example, or has put their fist down and had a temper tantrum as an adult, and everyone goes, wow, that was kind of like immature and not great. But that person is just going, I'm not feeling heard, I'm not feeling seen, my needs are not being met. I learned that worked one time, so if I do that again, I'm going to get my needs met. But that doesn't serve us anymore when we're adults.
Exactly.
But it's hardwired.
It is exactly. Dr. Russell Kennedy talks about this, the anxiety MD, where he talks about those situations that happen that we then almost like put down to that stressor or a form of anxiety, and it sets an alarm off in our body, right? Which is essentially our nervous system saying, I'm going into hyper or hypo, right? Like we spoke about earlier. And I need to recognize this to be able to move past it. And we have to be able to bring ourselves back on the track at the end of the day, right? And I think sometimes we have to look at ourselves as that child perhaps that we once were, that did have that temper tantrum. And Dr. Russell Kennedy, when he was on the podcast, he said, me and Jonathan were both hosting that one, and he said, next time you have an argument, just imagine yourselves as the child version of each other. So if John now has a tantrum, let's say, I see like a 7-year-old version of John, and when I have a tantrum, he sees this like 5-year-old me. And because we obviously know our personal experiences very intimately, we come now from a place of deeper compassion for what that person might be experiencing and going through, rather than actually taking it personally, fighting back, and then it's like this big clash that happens. And it's so healthy to then, once you've worked on that stuff and you know yourself so well, to bring it into a romantic setting. What is your thoughts on anybody struggling in a relationship now that perhaps hasn't looked at themselves and their own stuff, but might be blaming the relationship or the other person for the problem? No, it's a big question, but like, what's your take on that?
It's a very big question. I think the first thing would be is to go back to what we said earlier, like find out your attachment, get reading up on that, take the quiz. But there's a lot of debate in the literature that blame kind of completely, it doesn't serve us at all, because it's about changing our perception and leading with love. And what I mean by that is both you and your partner are exceptionally hurt.
Yeah.
It's to stop villainizing the other person and to see them as somebody who's excessively hurt. If someone's got anger, it's because they're going through a hell of a lot of pain themselves, and they're also suffering because they're feeling unseen and unheard and unloved. If someone's shutting down, they're feeling unloved and they're in a place of hurt. So it is really hard to do when we're activated. But exactly, what you're saying is if we really try and lead from a place of love rather than fear, I do believe that it, naively conquers all, but it's very hard to do when you're, leading from a place of fear. And when those core wounds, no matter how much work you've done, start to show up, maybe you feel trapped, maybe you feel abandoned, and you're trying to lead from a place of love, there is that time where, you can feel that armor or that wall shutting down to protect you. And the question is, do you want to shut down and armor up, which potentially may end up sabotaging the relationship you're in?
Yeah.
Or do you want to put your heart on your sleeve, try vulnerability, try opening questions, conversations, try and listen, try and understand, and no matter how painful it kind of is of what you hear, always try and lead from a place of love, and understanding, because most people do not deliberately, outrightly try to hurt or inflict pain on others, in my experience. They're not trying to do it. It might happen, and it does happen for sure. Okay, so I'm not, there's no blinkers there, but most people are doing it without meaning to do it, or maybe it's their subconscious that's doing it, but their intention isn't that. And I so hear, in my clients and in the couples and husbands and wives that I deal with, it's that the biggest thing is both people are genuinely trying to love, they're genuinely trying to put into the relationship. But remember earlier when we were talking about that misalignment of needs, that misalignment of knowing how to love the other, the misalignment of how can I actually connect, and then my own tinted glasses, it becomes a very complex situation. So if people are brave enough to dive in and start to have these vulnerable conversations, start to truly get to know themselves, because then they can ask the person that they're with for support, or do you know, I found this out today about myself. Did you know this about me? I found out today that actually I really enjoy quality time with you, but I know you always tell me you love me, and that's lovely to hear, but I kind of would like to go on a date night, or I really would like it if you hold my hand. Again, it's like two partners walk down the street. If one of them's got love and connection as a need, whereas the other kind of has more significance as a need or purpose, possibly one partner sees them holding hands and thinks, amazing, because the RNS filter sees that. Whereas partner two, if it's all about significance and drive and ambition, they might see the designer clothes they're wearing and not even focus on them holding hands. So, it's asking why, it's just asking questions, and it's actually trying to really get to know the person you're with, so that you, as you said, you can try and create this deeper, more meaningful connection and just get to know the person. You might have been in a relationship for 20 years, but do you truly know them?
Me and Jonathan still get to know each other like every day. There's stuff that we still find out about each other. We've been married 6 years now, but we've learned how to continually get to know each other, and it's taken time to do that. But it would not be possible if we hadn't made the vow to each other to lay our armor down. Because you cannot get to know somebody else if we're all armored up, not fully, not properly, not intimately, emotionally, physically, mentally. It's just, I think it's impossible. So I think if anybody's listening to this, they really do want to experience deep, meaningful relationships, and that is often something a lot of people come to us specifically and ask for when it comes to coaching. It's, do you really? How far are you willing to lean into this? How courageous are you willing to be to get to know yourself that way, and then slowly take off bits of armor over time?
But this is no easy thing, because our love and our fear continuously in battle with self-preservation and survival. And if there's a situation where we don't feel safe emotionally, it's very difficult for people to do that. So, reach out to your support network, do the work. And the key thing is that we all feel, 100% safe. And whether that starts to deviate, be able to pause it and try and reframe the safety that we have in our environment.
Yeah, definitely. So listen, let's I feel like we've been talking about very practical things as we've been speaking. However, for our listeners, I'm not sure if the practical tips are as clear as probably maybe what they're thinking for what they might be experiencing. So as always, we tend to ask our community if they've got any questions for some of our guests that are coming on when we float these topics in front of them. And one question that somebody has shared with us is like they notice themselves freeze when they are in kind of a hard conversation with their partner. So their partner is, relatively conscious. They're really trying. Both sides are trying, like you said, they're not trying to shut each other down. But this person keeps on freezing. What does she do? What strategies and practical things could she do in the moment? Because obviously, everything we've spoken about is kind of deep work that's going to take some time. They need to go away and really kind of focus into. But what do you do in the moment when you're in that freeze situation?
Yeah, so I would say if you know that this is a trait of yours, that this is a repetitive thoughts, or this is happening time after time, and you have a difficult conversation, try and plan for the conversation. So if you know that you need to have a talk, I always advise my clients who struggle to communicate to maybe write things down. So worst case, they can go back and look at their piece of paper, because you would never go into a boardroom or an important high stake meeting without being fully prepared for that meeting. And we forget that in relationships, and we forget that actually that these conversations with our partners are sometimes really important and they're very high stake, but we kind of don't necessarily go in them with a plan.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes help us stay regulated because we know what we want to say. But in the moment, it is kind of just going, I'm going to try and pause. If you can communicate and just say, I just need 2 minutes to kind of calm myself and regulate myself. This conversation is important to me. I promise I'll be back in 2 minutes. Yeah. Then you're not triggering the other person. That's one thing. I'm sure you've talked about breath work on the podcast before. So it's kind of like just breathe through your nose, breathe out through your mouth. If you feel that you're going to be crying, just try and calm yourself as much as possible with breath work. But yeah, I would say plan for the conversation as much as possible, which I know is not always easy to do. Ask for 2 minutes if you're able to communicate, and try your breath work. Those would be like the kind of the 3 things that I would advocate.
Perfect. So next question, it's kind of quick fire now. The question was, why do I keep going back to somebody that I know is bad for me? And I think we've touched upon this when it comes to like the unmet needs today. But I keep going, that literally the person keeps on going back to this person they know is bad for them. They do not treat them well, but they feel good when they're with them. But they know in the long term it's just not good. What do they do?
Yeah. So this is not it's not a quick answer for you, because this is probably the push-pull dynamic, and possibly there's trauma bonding going on here. But ultimately, the person needs to ask themselves, if you keep going back to a situation where you're not fully being loved, you're not fully feeling the connection that you want, and your needs are not being met, your fear is fear of being alone, probably. It's your fear of being abandoned, and it's your fear of accepting breadcrumbs so that you're not alone. So in this situation, it's trying to build up your confidence and your resilience within yourself, to know that you are good enough, to know that you're not alone. Seek out your friends, seek out your family. What can you do for yourself while you're not abandoning yourself? Because sometimes when we have the biggest fear of being alone or being abandoned, from us repeating these bad cycles that we know are not good for us, they're exhausting, we don't know where we're standing, we're actually activating our biggest fear, which is abandonment, because we're actually abandoning ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's trying to find where you're not alone and not abandoned in other avenues in your life, away from this one particular situation.
Nice. Great answer, because it's such a big question to be able to answer that way. But
Such a big question.
yeah, but that's good. Again, like it's a great starting point for anybody listening, because that's huge, abandonment. Yeah. So thank you for that. So next question. This is one we get a lot, and I mentioned this to you before we hopped on to this recording today. Is the complaint that it's really hard to meet somebody in the UAE or meet somebody as an expat, being here, and a lot of people tend to find it very stressful. What I tend to ask is, okay, well, like, where are you going? What are you doing to meet someone? And like you mentioned earlier, it's like they're actually not, they're staying in, they're not putting themselves out there in any way. So for me, that's almost like an obvious first step. But I would love to know your insights on that, because you know this way more than I do.
Oh gosh, I can't answer this one quickly either. I did a whole hour on Dubai Eye on my research on the influence of expatriatism and the influence of living away from home on our attachment. So if that interests you, check out the link, it's on my website. But in short, when we're away from home, we're away from our family origin. So our attachment system is even more extremely in activation or deactivation, because we're in an environment that is unfamiliar to us. When we're in an unfamiliar environment, whether danger is perceived or not, the unfamiliar can feel triggering. So the underlying attachment that we kind of have as our dominant is kind of being accelerated more on a day-to-day basis than it would be when we're in our home origin. So if you don't know about your attachment system dynamic, that is for sure ruling. Okay. And then also, in the second reason it's hard to meet people here is because there's so much cultural difference. And when we go down to our needs on our values and morals, and I'm going to say spiritual, but I don't mean religion here. I kind of mean like our outlook on life. Sometimes the difference when we get so far in a relationship becomes so out of alignment, remember, with our subconscious and our needs, that creates a difficulty in meeting people. So that might be why dates only get so far. So it's probably because your avoidance or your anxious is being activated. It's probably that your deep-rooted needs and cultural needs within your subconscious are out of alignment with different nationalities that you're meeting, which makes it harder to feel loved and be loved. And then you're in an unfamiliar environment. So you're naturally armored up more. You're naturally trying to protect yourself. We all become more independent, and expats have this label of hyper independence. It's the same, when you're a university student and you move away from home, or you're an armed forces personnel and you move away, you're armoring up because you're on your own, kind of thing. So the avoidance side of you is activated more. So the dating dynamic in ourselves makes it more difficult when you're living away from home. Does that answer it in short?
It does. It really does. It definitely does. And what we'll do is make sure that the link to that research that you've done as well is in the show notes, as well as obviously your website and where they can find you, because it's well worth digging into that, I think, for sure. Thank you so much, Charlie, for coming on the show today. Before we wrap up, what else do our listeners need to know? Are there any final words of wisdom that you would like to share?
Final words of wisdom. Honestly, if you've never got in touch with a therapist, get in touch with a therapist. It's not about being unhealthy. It's not about being in a bad place. It's about education. And I always say being in a relationship and being a parent are probably two of the most significant jobs that we have in life. Yet we have no education, we have no training around them. We're just expected to do them. So if you can live in a more harmonious state within yourself and with others, why would you not? That would kind of be my question back to them. So yeah, reach out, get in contact, and really start learning about yourself, because it kind of sets you free. And I do believe that when we know more about ourselves, we become more regulated, we lower our stress, we become in a happier place for sure. So yeah, that would be my final words of wisdom. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Where can
I'm glad I got to meet Margaret too.
She wasn't too loud today. Where can our listeners come and find you?
Yeah, so find me on charlottespurway.com. The links that I talked about today and the free quiz are all on there, and you can find my email address on there. You can also book a discovery call if it's something that you want to explore a little bit more. So charlottespurway.com, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you for the work that you do. Keep on making relationships healthier and happier, whether it be individual or relational. I think it's absolutely necessary so we can reduce the stress that comes along with it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this episode and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Then share it with a friend who you think might benefit.
Spread the word. That's how we're going to impact the world, by helping each other.
We appreciate you so much, and as always, unconditional love and wellness to you.